Ireland has had many close brushes and links with fascism down through the years. For example, an Irish woman once shot Mussolini, only inches away from killing him. After the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, Hitler considered killing himself to become a martyr. He thought of going on a hunger strike, taking inspiration from the mayor of Cork, Terence MacSweeney, who did so in 1920, and instantly became a martyr of Irish nationalism at the time. Hitler had much interest in Irish nationalism, and he even had a half-Irish nephew. When Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, it was extremely unpopular in Ireland, to the point where an effigy of Neville Chamberlain was burned in Dublin publicly, with no interference from the police. And during the war, 2 Irishmen signed up for the SS. German propaganda also made a couple of movies in Ireland, including My Life for Ireland and The Fox of Glenarvan, specifically made to rouse up anti-British sentiment in Germany. The Irish Taoiseach De Valera and President Douglas Hyde both sent their condolences to Germany after Hitler died. De Valera was apparently holding out for a German victory all throughout the war, and a swastika was flown at half-mast outside the German embassy in Dublin to mark Hitler's death. After the war, he even went as far as to claim the atrocities at Bergen-Belsen camp were, quote, anti-national propaganda. After Taoiseach De Valera and President Hyde paid their respects, the German deputy ambassador responded with great gratitude and said, quote, I know the admiration always felt by the Führer for Ireland and her history, and I'm sure that the debt for the liberty of his people will also be understood by the Irish people. After the war, many former SS and Wehrmacht troops moved to Ireland, most famously Otto Skorzeny, the man who rescued Mussolini in 1943. Not just Germans moved to Ireland, but even the British fascist leader Sir Oswald Mosley also did, with his wife Diane. But definitely Ireland's closest brush with fascism came with Eoin O'Duffy and the Blueshirts. The Blueshirts at their peak had a membership of over 48,000 people, which in a country of only 2.8 million was quite a lot. To understand why the Blueshirts were set up, we first have to look at their rivals. In 1932, De Valera's party Fianna Fáil won a landslide election. De Valera was a vital figure in the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War in 1922. He was a national icon. After getting into office, De Valera lifted the ban on the IRA and sought to integrate IRA members into the Gardaí and military. And many of them, mainly socialists, followed a campaign of no free speech for traitors. There were still plenty of tensions left over from the Irish Civil War a decade prior. Many Fianna Fáil members and supporters began to attack the meetings and rallies of their rivals, a centre-right party called Cumann na Gael. So in August 1932, Cumann na Gael set up a paramilitary to defend their meetings and called it the Army Comrades Association. They slowly shuffled along until September 1933, when a new leader took them by storm, a man who changed Irish 20th century history. Eoin O'Duffy was an impressive figure in the Irish War of Independence, rapidly rising from captain to commandant to brigadier, and was once called the best man in Ulster by none other than Michael Collins himself. In 1921, he was elected as an MP for Sinn Féin. The next year, in 1922, he became Chief of Staff of the IRA during the Irish Civil War. Then he became Gardaí Commissioner for over a decade, until De Valera became Taoiseach and fired O'Duffy in February 1933, as they were on opposing sides during the Civil War. So O'Duffy was out of work and now free to venture into new territories. The Army Comrades Association quickly tried to scoop him up and begged him to lead the organisation. O'Duffy accepted the honour and began making it his own, and changed the name of the organisation to the National Guard. By then, they had adopted their famous blue shirt uniform, of course taking inspiration from Mussolini's black shirts and Hitler's brown shirts. They also adopted the Roman salute, and they would shout "Hoc O'Duffy" to show their dedication to him and the movement. Ned Cronin, one of the founding members, was the one who suggested to start wearing blue uniforms so they could recognise each other during street fights with leftists. They quickly became known as the Blueshirts. The Blueshirts exploded in popularity, with hundreds of branches throughout the country, and they became a household name in Ireland. This became a nationwide movement, not just for men, but also for women. Although it was originally a male-only organisation, women soon became involved in huge numbers and were just as passionate as the men. Like the men, they also adopted the blue uniform. All women and girls wore a blue blouse with a dark blue beret and tie, and a dark blue skirt. They became known as the Blue Blouses, and over 12,500 women became involved in 628 branches throughout the country at its peak. In February 1934, over 1,000 blue blouses marched through a small town called Skibbereen in Cork. And in September, over 3,000 blue blouses marched to Bale na Blá in Cork to commemorate Michael Collins. In August 1933, just a month after he took over, O'Duffy had organised a parade of over 20,000 blue shirts to march through Dublin to commemorate Michael Collins, Kevin O'Higgins and Arthur Griffith, 3 Irish nationalists. De Valera, seeing parallels of Mussolini's march on Rome, feared they would try to overthrow him in the government. De Valera sent a special branch to raid their houses and seize their firearms. And just a week before the parade was scheduled, he banned the parade and placed Gardaí outside key locations. A week later, he banned the Blueshirts altogether and made them an illegal organisation. Of course, this only triggered a Streisand effect, and the Blueshirts became even more popular and famous throughout the country.
It is true that a semi-military body was formed here over a year ago, and that under new leadership it has recently avowed that one of its aims is the overthrow of representative government. The Irish people fought for centuries to regain control of their own affairs. They have not the least intention of surrendering that control now to any dictator or to any militarist group whatever.
In September 1933, feeling the pressure of De Valera's ban, they merged entirely with Cumann na Gael to form Fine Gael, which is the party now currently in power today in Ireland, though of course very different to what it once was. O'Duffy was officially the first leader of this fresh new party. After O'Duffy became leader of Fine Gael, some members began to proudly wear their blue shirts in the Irish Parliament, Dáil Éireann. A bill was proposed to ban political uniforms, but this was later rejected. O'Duffy's Fine Gael meetings were often attacked by IRA socialists, who O'Duffy called communists, including one time in Kerry when he was hit over the head with a hammer and his car was torched. Later that year, a group of IRA socialists planned to assassinate O'Duffy in County Kerry. A man was sent to Limerick to find out which car O'Duffy would be travelling in, but the man purposely gave false information so O'Duffy could escape. De Valera and the IRA were using more and more violent means to shut down O'Duffy, and O'Duffy once hit back with a public threat to have De Valera killed when he said, quote, "Whenever Mr. De Valera runs away from the Republic and arrests you Republicans and puts you on board beds in Mountjoy, he's entitled to the same fate he gave Mick Collins and Kevin O'Higgins." O'Duffy was arrested for this a few days later. He was summoned to court where he was accused of leading an illegal organisation and incitement to murder, although he was never convicted. In August 1934, O'Duffy called on farmers throughout Ireland to reject the government's farming tax and not to pay land annuities. The party were charting into new territories, as O'Duffy was now blatantly calling for the Irish people to break the law. One of the party's vice presidents, Professor James Hogan, resigned over the matter and was fed up with O'Duffy's radical rhetoric. Shortly after this, a group of Blueshirts drove a truck into a yard in Cork where a farmer's auction was taking place. The Gardaí opened fire on them and killed one man named Michael Lynch, who instantly became a martyr for the Blueshirts. His death caused national uproar, and his funeral was attended by thousands of people in Cork. O'Duffy wasn't just clashing with leftists, he was clashing with the majority of his own party on everything, from how radical the nationalism should be, to Ireland's position in the Commonwealth, even down to economic policies. Throughout 1934, O'Duffy's openly anti-democratic and radical proposals were becoming too much for the party and their supporters, and he once even made a threat to invade Northern Ireland. The Blueshirts were originally set up in defence to leftist attacks, but now O'Duffy was on the attack in many different ways, and the members were uncomfortable with the radical direction this was all going. Tensions were building in the party, but the last straw came after the 1934 local elections, when the party won majorities on only 8 councils, after O'Duffy had predicted winning 20. The leading members of the party got together and told O'Duffy he could only speak from scripts that had been approved by them, and he was not to say anything in interviews without their consultation. The damage was already done at this point, and O'Duffy, furious at their patronising, resigned in September 1934. Clearly O'Duffy was not just the leader of the Blueshirts, he was the Blueshirts, and was the main reason people signed up, as it all collapsed in just a year's time after he left, going from 48,000 members down to just 4,000. The next month, he announced he was reforming the Blueshirts as his own independent movement, called the National Corporate Party. In December 1934, O'Duffy and his men attended the International Fascist Conference in Switzerland, alongside representatives from Spain, Romania, France, Norway, Greece, Portugal, Austria, Lithuania, Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands and Switzerland. O'Duffy fought against anti-Semitism at the conference and told them all there was, quote, no Jewish problem in Ireland, and that he, quote, could not subscribe to the principles of the persecution of any race. After he returned home, he said he preferred Italian fascism to German National Socialism. But Italy and Germany would be the last countries on his mind very quickly. 1936 was an important year for Europe, as it was when the Spanish Civil War broke out, and a man named Francisco Franco and his nationalist groups rebelled against the communist, anti-Christian regime in Spain, where churches were being burned, priests hung from trees, nuns were being raped, and in 1936 nearly 7,000 clergymen were killed by leftists. Franco and his men were trying to save Spain from communism. The anti-Christian massacres were shocking to the world, but it was absolutely horrifying to Ireland, who was 93% Catholic and 99% Christian overall. Ireland quickly became the biggest supporters of Franco out of all the Western democracies. The war was seen in religious terms, rather than being political. Ireland and Spain have a long history, but most importantly, it was because the Irish people saw the Spanish as Catholic brethren. Support for Franco was absolutely massive in Ireland, and amongst most Irish abroad too. Many Irish Catholics in America helped Franco. In fact, in the US Congress, a proposal to sell arms to the leftists in Spain was blocked by none other than Joseph Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's father. In response to the anti-Christian massacres, the Irish Christian Front was set up and was an instant overnight success. Their first rally gained over 15,000 people, and one rally in Cork alone got over 40,000 people. Fights between nationalists and leftist hecklers would sometimes break out. The organisation was founded with the intention of supporting and raising funds for Franco and his nationalists. They managed to raise over £30,000 and also sent over medical supplies, even ambulances. Franco's men thanked the Irish Christians for their support. The Irish Christian Front was founded by Fine Gael politician Patrick Belton, who the Irish left tried to defame as a fascist. Belton once said, quote, "If it is necessary to be a fascist to defend Christianity, then I am a fascist, and so are my colleagues." However, by late 1937, Irish support had dropped for the Irish Christian Front, as the Civil War evolved from a religious war into a more political one, and some Irish didn't agree with the violent responses from the Spanish nationalists. Also by this point, the European powers were heavily involved, like Britain and France, who were helping the leftists, and Germany and Italy, who were helping the nationalists. The Irish Christian Front went out just as quickly as it came, and dissolved in 1937. But of course, the Irish Christian Front wasn't the only organisation to support Franco and the nationalists. This was the perfect battle for Mr. O'Duffy. His dream had come true. He got to fight head-on against the thing he hated most: communists. In August 1936, the Irish Independent published a letter from O'Duffy seeking fighters for the, quote, anti-Red Crusade. And O'Duffy travelled to Spain later in 1936 to meet Franco and the Ramirez, promising that 5,000 Irishmen would follow him. One of O'Duffy's men organised with Germany to send a German ship to Galway to pick up 500 Irish volunteers. As they boarded, hundreds of people gathered to sing Christian hymns, as the volunteers were blessed by priests and given prayer books and badges with the Sacred Heart on them. Upon arrival, they were given German uniforms dyed a light green with silver heart badges. Irishmen made up the bulk of the International Brigade for the Nationalists. Over 7,000 Irishmen signed up to fight for Christianity and Franco, although only 700 could be sent due to complications. Around 300 Irish volunteered for the leftists. The Irish fighters had a mixed reputation. They were criticised by the Spanish for their excessive drinking and were called immoral by their chaplain. Most volunteers witnessed mass executions, including the machine gunning of captured leftists. One volunteer said, quote, "We saw General Franco's army executing the Reds in mass groups every morning." One Irishman noted in his diary it was hard to keep up morale. Quote, "Bandera cracking up, all men are getting sick and weak, dozens going to the hospital each day, great rumours about going home." It's not known exactly how many died, but it's said to be anywhere from 31 to 35 deaths, with more than 40 wounded. As Franco no longer needed him, he never sent another ship to collect the next 600 volunteers waiting in Galway in 1937. Later that year, O'Duffy offered to withdraw his troops, and Franco accepted. They returned home to thousands of cheering people in Dublin. O'Duffy later wrote about his time fighting Spain in his 1938 book, Crusade in Spain, with some anti-Semitic undertones, where he wrote that they were, quote, "powerful political Masonic organisations directed and focused by the Communist International." After Franco and the Nationalists won the war in 1939 and saved millions of Christian lives, O'Duffy congratulated Franco. Franco then thanked O'Duffy in return, quote, "on the victory of the Spanish army in defence of Christianity, Occidental civilization and humanity over the forces of destruction and disorder." After 1939, O'Duffy was put under government surveillance by the Irish military intelligence. Many of O'Duffy's men were not happy with him by this point, including all the men who volunteered but never got to fight. They were disappointed with O'Duffy's failure in Spain. By this point, it seemed not only had O'Duffy's political career peaked, but also his life in general. There he was at 49, no wife, no children, no more chance with his love for the military or politics. His role in the Spanish Civil War would be his last dance. So after a long life of fighting the Irish War of Independence, becoming a politician for Sinn Féin, fighting the Irish Civil War, leading Ireland's fascist paramilitary, becoming the first leader of Fine Gael, organising his own fascist party, and leading his brigade in the Spanish Civil War, it was all over. O'Duffy led an action-packed life most of us will never get to see. Perhaps it was all too much for him though. as he fell into an alcohol addiction in the last few years of his life. O'Duffy died in November 1944. He never did live to see the death of his idols Mussolini and Hitler, but by then the writing was on the wall for the fascist movement across Europe. Despite the controversy in his later life, he received a state funeral and was buried at Glasnevin Cemetery alongside other Irish national heroes such as Michael Collins, Daniel O'Connell, Charles Parnell, Roger Casement, Arthur Griffith, and where de Valera himself would later be buried. So why did Ireland lean so closely into fascism? Well, Orm Douglas sums it up simply in his book Ireland's Fascist New Order, quote, "In contrast to the depression-ridden, backward-looking democracies, Germany and Italy within a few years had revived their national cultures, recovered their lost territories, and put their millions of unemployed back to work." O'Duffy is a complex figure with many sides and lived through a very complex political time in Europe. Millions of people chose fascism simply because it was seen as a bulwark against the rising evil of communism. I'll end this video with 3 clips of Irishmen who fought in the Spanish Civil War, with the first who fought for the leftists and the other 2 for the nationalists.
For to fight against Franco was seen as enlisting on the side of the devil.
If you were knowing you were going, there was a pogrom atmosphere, I think, but that's not an overstatement. And naturally, the people, not all the people, but a large majority of the people were pro-Franco, and they believed that it was a war between Christ and Antichrist.
But I mean, it's said to be called a traitor. I mean, it was 50 times worse, I think, and in West Britain, which of course there was no meaning at all for it. But just because you weren't voting for de Valera, you were a traitor.
I'm proud to be associated with good men, with good, sincere Irishmen that weren't in looking for something, that loved Ireland and believed in an Ireland that Michael Collins espoused for them.